We're good to go.
Great. Thanks, Brendan. Welcome to the April 20th meeting of the CV6 Public Safety Committee. I'm Matt Roberts, chair of the committee. This meeting is called to order at 6:32 this evening. Tonight, we're joined by Assistant District Manager Brendan Berth. And as you all know, New York State law requires all community board members to have their cameras on, first and last names displayed from the time the meeting is called to order until the time the meeting is adjourned. Camera is not on, your name is not properly displayed, you cannot count the quorum. Members of the public, you can raise any questions or comments that you have through the Q&A feature of Zoom. If there's time following the committee's discussion, we will field questions from the public. We still need a volunteer to take the meeting summary for tonight. So if you're able to do so, please raise your hand through Zoom. I feel like we do this every night.
I see Eric is raising his hand.
Eric, volunteering? Appreciate it. Thanks, Eric. And if you can fill out the doodle poll, I can tell you we will most likely not meet in June, so that only leaves one more meeting before the summer break. If anybody would like to volunteer for next month. That brings us to attendance, and Brendan will conduct the roll call.
Committee members, I will call your name and you will unmute yourselves. When your name is called, please say present. I will announce if there is quorum. Stu Desser.
Most people don't like when I unmute myself.
But
I'm
you're
a fan.
Eric Goldberg.
Present.
Sadie Howard. I do not see her. She is absent. Steve O. Yeah.
Present.
Okay. Steve is present. Matt Roberts.
Present.
Ann Sullivan.
Present.
And Lou Sapersky is absent, but we have a quorum.
All right. Thanks, Brendan. So that brings us to the agenda. The agenda for tonight's meeting was distributed ahead of time by the board office. Here's on the screen before you. If there's no objection, we will adopt the agenda as stated. Although if there's no objection, since we have quorum right now, the second I would like to reverse the order and pull up the item number 2, which we've already discussed and really just requires a vote because the draft of the resolution had not been distributed in accordance with the bylaws last month. So if there's no objection, I'd like to just move through that first. I know Ann's not feeling well, and Steve is at 2 different meetings. So I am not sure if we're going to have quorum for the entire meeting or not, but I'd like to do that. But not seeing any objection there. And we'll adopt the agenda. Meeting summary from March 16th meeting has not been drafted yet. Once we receive it, everybody knows Seema has resigned from the board, and she has the draft of that meeting summary. So we're in the process of trying to track that down. So nothing to adopt there. All right, everybody knows the ground rules here. No one may speak until granted the floor. Committee members, if you have a question about committee business or wish to make a motion, please raise your hand on Zoom. Chat function should not be used for committee business or questions about agenda topics. All such remarks need to be made on the record using your hand through Zoom, raising your hand through Zoom. Chat should only be used where there's any technical difficulties or to state in writing any information that was already stated aloud on the record. When a committee member is given the floor to speak, I'll identify you. You can unmute yourself and then speak, and cameras need to be on with first and last name displayed. So committee business here. So I'm going to call up agenda item number 2 real fast for see if there's any questions, comments. Brendan has the text of the draft. Committee members should have received this already. Brendan, you're requesting the floor.
Yeah, just a quick stylistic question. I know that it was legislation that prompted the drafting of this resolution. Does the committee want to mention the number of that, like the bill number in this resolution? Just an open question.
Um, my initial instinct is yes, but I think there were some moving parts there. And you're requesting the floor?
Yeah, that was what I was just gonna say. My instinct also is to say yes. It's always good to give people something to point to.
Stu?
Just as a general proposition, my reflex is to not, only because last time I drafted a bill, reso, which included the bill numbers, the bill ended up getting carried over to the next session and it became another number. So I think I recognize the arguments both ways, but there's a basis for leaving it, without that specific reference. But I don't have any objection to putting it in either. I'm not feeling strong.
I would say, I mean, I think we should include it if it's active legislation, and then obviously, it can be changed.
Okay, it's fine with me. I just expressed my, my.
Alright. Sounds good. Anne?
Yeah, Stu, you make a good point. I wonder if there's some language that can just say something like like bill number, A whatever, S whatever, for this year, or similar bills in following, in future sessions.
Yeah, that's the approach I would take, is just say, currently, whatever bill numbers that, but worded so it's evergreen language, regardless of what form what bill number it's given.
So I don't know I haven't figured out the protocol yet for a committee meeting, but I would say just insert that right after the word legislation.
Mhm. You muted yourself in mid-sentence.
How about just like a legislation and then currently, and have the bill
Yeah.
numbers in there?
Yeah, I think that's the best way to just word it. Legislation, which currently is Assembly 5074 and Senate 5332. I mean, the way it reads now, the way I'm reading it is, if we're urging the passage of that legislation, so in theory, those should be the final bill numbers. Obviously, stranger things have happened in Albany.
I was thinking that, didn't we say something about having or corresponding bills in future sessions?
Yeah, I mean,
I'm
think
just
we
trying
could-
to
I think
address
we could-
Stu's point.
yeah, I think we can find a way, some language that satisfies that, but it just sounds a little bit funny that we're almost writing this, knowing that it's, we're writing this, urging the passage of those bills, but also sounding like we're giving up on them. You know what I mean? That they're not going to actually. That's my only hesitation there. Is it just sounds like But I guess we could say, or any other bill numbers that maybe applied, or I don't know how we want to word that.
And just to note, the trick of this piece of legislation is it was vetoed last year. So
Right.
we do want to try to keep this sort of evergreen.
Yeah, I mean, right. I mean, that's a tough one because we don't want to sound like we're expecting a veto. But maybe language that we urge Governor Hochul to not to, I mean, because let's say the same thing. Let's say these bills were to pass, and then the governor vetoes it again. Then I think we should probably say that we're urging the governor to urging the Assembly and the Senate to pass the bills and the governor to sign them into law. And you have your hand up.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that I think one way maybe we can kind of have it both ways is if at the title of it, if we don't put, we kind of leave it what it was, which is like, we want legislation to do this. Like not in the resolved, Brendan, like up at the top in the title of the. Yeah, if we just like that, I think, that way, if it's not this bill, it's what it is next year. I think that might get it,
Right.
get both.
Yeah, I mean, I think you need the bill numbers just in case, some of these things get flagged that way. Like if they see a bill number, then suddenly somebody pays attention a little bit more than is just a generic.
And it can be hard to find a bill if you don't have like the exact title or the bill number.
Yeah. Supporting legislation requiring the defendants who are ordered into drug rehabilitation treatment be informed of their right to choose a non-spiritual program. And I think that's pretty straightforward as a title. All right, any other, Brendan, can you just scroll down to the resolve? So we can read through that again.
Yeah, just a quick stylistic note, anything crossed out would be removed, anything in red would be added.
Got it. All right, committee members, any additional language changes? So does that accomplish what you were looking for? And
Call to question?
is there a second?
I'll second.
Very good. Brendan will call the roll.
Okay, when I say your name, please say whether you are in favor, opposed, abstain, or abstain for cause. Stu Desser,
In favor?
Eric Goldberg,
In favor?
Sadie Howard is not here. Steve O,
In favor?
Matt Roberts,
In favor.
and Ann Seligman.
In favor.
With 5 in favor, nobody opposed, abstained, or abstaining for cause, the resolution unanimously passes.
All right, thanks, Brendan. Thanks, committee. I knew that would be quick, so we got that out of the way early. And now we can turn to scaffolding. We have Chris Carroll from Borough President Levine's office. He's the subject matter expert. To give us a little overview of, I think everybody's seen the plan that was proposed, although I can't, I'm not sure if there's any members of the public who might be unfamiliar with it. So, Chris, welcome. perhaps you want to maybe start off with a brief overview.
Yeah, sure. And thanks for the invitation. Really happy to be here. And this is something that the borough president and our entire office is super excited about. My name's Chris. I'm a policy director and the advisor to the borough president, and I've been working a lot on this. And I would say a year and a half ago, didn't expect to dive into the world of sidewalk sheds and scaffolding, but found myself going way into the deep end, which is, I guess, a good thing. I'm going to assume that folks have seen the plan and was just going to walk right through it, but I guess it makes sense for me to throw it in the chat if that's helpful for folks. So that there's just, I'll just throw the link here.
Yeah, we do have a couple of members of the public, but there we go.
Great. Broadly, before I walk through it, there is a kind of wanted to share one of our intent and what we're trying to accomplish here. It's probably the least controversial thing I've ever said, that scaffolding is everywhere and everyone's got feelings about it. And that generally speaking, it always feels like it's up for a very, very long time. That sentiment is not wrong. We have enough scaffolding to take us from here to Montreal. We've put in one linear line. And that on average, sidewalk sheds are up for 498 days, which is an exceptionally long time and does beg the question of what's happening. And it's actually something that's getting to be a bigger and bigger problem. It is getting worse, not better. There are examples of scaffolding that have been up for over 6,000 days in Manhattan, 2,000 days, 4,000 days. And so when you're talking about years like that, 10 years at a time, there's a serious problem. And you have to beg the question, how do we get rid of some of these sheds? And we have to also acknowledge that sidewalk sheds are always up for a good reason, right? They're up for a public safety reason. There is a facade problem that's been identified in a building, and it's there to keep pedestrians safe. When work is going on, scaffolding is there to keep workers safe. And so the combination of the two are important ways of preserving the safety of general public and workforce. This plan is designed to make it so that the work that is being required is easier to do, can be done in a faster way. And this plan is designed to make it so that when sidewalk sheds are necessary, they are as least impactful on the local community as possible. There are 5 strategies in this overall plan. Each one has a number of individual recommendations that the borough president has made. I'll walk through them now, and please feel free to stop me if there are questions about any of it. I'm definitely happy to have this be a conversation. The first one is really the thing that we've heard the most about, and that's that there are instances of buildings that have a facade problem and have scaffolding up for years on end simply because they can't afford to fix the facade problem. HDFCs, Mitchell Lama buildings, some even co-ops, affordable housing programs. These are buildings where if you can have a $3 or $4 million capital project to fix your facade, that might be totally outside of the realm of possibility. And as a result, you have scaffolding up where they'd rather pay the rent for the equipment on the sidewalk and the permitting fee with the city to just keep the sidewalk shut up. Our first recommendation here is to figure out a way of actually helping to provide financing for those buildings, low interest loans, something run by the city to allow for buildings that really are having trouble affording these projects to be able to really make a dent there. And the second recommendation, again, to help these buildings is to really provide some technical support. I don't know if anyone here is on a co-op or in a condo, but we've heard from the industry that oftentimes it's 100% unfair to expect folks that are on a board to actually be able to make very technical decisions about what a building needs, what the timelines are necessary, how to interact with the city, how to finance some of these projects. And then actually that provides a delay all by itself. I'll pause there. Let's see, Eric.
Eric, did you have a question?
Yeah. I just had a quick question on the first piece, the financing. Certainly get the technical support aspect, but for the financing, would that only be for buildings that, I don't know, the first group that you talked about, either, city-owned properties or, other housing that gets, government supported in one nature or another? I guess I'm just a little uneasy without knowing the details about providing financing to any private.
That's the right instinct. And so I totally appreciate that.
Right.
We're actually not thinking the
Yeah.
city at all. We're putting the city in a different category. We are
Right.
asking that the city identify a very stringent way to actually ensure that there is a true financial hardship. We don't need to be subsidizing the folks that can actually pay for these things simply because they're property owners, right? I think your point is well taken that we have a lot of things that we need to be putting city resources towards, and that's not necessarily one of them. There should be a way of actually identifying true financial hardship and very stringent qualifications. We don't spell those out here. We'd actually ask DOB
Yeah.
to do that.
Right.
Right now, this is not something that DOB has the authority to do, and that's why it's in our plan where we've been pushing for legislation to actually make that happen. It would require state action and potentially local action after that. But this is like a major hurdle for many buildings, particularly ones where there's, a sidewalk shed up for a long period of time.
Right.
It's rare
Yeah.
for-
Yeah. No, that's great. I appreciate the response. I just wanted to make sure when we hear, multi-million-dollar one-bedroom apartments selling in Manhattan, that this is not another avenue for them to access low interest financing.
We're on the same
Thank
page
you.
there, for sure.
Yeah, thanks.
Strategy 2 is figuring out ways to reduce some of the permitting delays that actually lead to serious problems in extended periods of time for sidewalk sheds to be up. And these are the situations where you'd see sidewalk sheds and no active work being done. Oftentimes, permitting can take up to 8, 9, 10 months because sometimes it's complicated and sometimes because of capacity issues of the city. Great example is actually at the Landmarks Preservation Commission, where you have 30% or so of Manhattan in a historic district, buildings that are made of terracotta or who are otherwise in a historic district or that are historic and designated themselves actually have to go to LPC to get a permit, then to DOB to get a permit before any construction can start. That entire time a sidewalk shed has been up. LPC is not a facade expert. They don't have a unit for this. They don't have the ability to expedite this at the moment. So we're actually calling for the creation of a facade unit at LPC to help move some of these projects along. Right now, after talking to contractors in the city, their expectation when they're figuring out timelines is that any project in a historic district that requires LPC, it's adding 10 months to a project. Again, that's before work ever starts. The second big one here is actually, again, state legislation, and it's allowing for property owners to actually resolve conflicts between neighboring property lines in a way that hopefully avoids going to court. We're hoping to create a way to petition for a mediated negotiation between property owners. Right now, if you had to put scaffolding up to keep people safe on someone else's property or on top of their building, you'd have to negotiate or go to court, which adds 5 to 6 months to a project, particularly in the state of the court system right now. This needs to be streamlined, and it's a problem very often where you hear that there's a property that's literally cannot start the work because they can't resolve a conflict with the next door neighbor. And so we're calling for a solution there. Strategy 3, holding buildings accountable for their inability to, or their failure to do the work. And Eric, this is a little bit closer to your question about what about the people that can't afford it but don't. The first one is that the city in this category. There's no reason why the city should have an average of over a year for scaffolding to be up and sidewalk sheds to be up, and that's the case. I'm not even including NYCHA in that category, actually. This is city-owned property. The city should be setting a better example. We're working with City Hall now to figure out how to actually identify the problems and then identify the solutions here. Because it's really actually a huge issue. If you just walk down to City Hall, straight across the street, the city office building with scaffolding has been up for 4 years. And that's pretty unacceptable. We're also calling for increasing fines and civil penalties for those buildings that have scaffolding up and cannot demonstrate a real financial hardship. They have the scaffolding up simply because they don't want to pay that, multi-million-dollar project and rather just pay the rent. But there's no good reason for that beyond they just want to not pay it. We're also pushing for DOB to be far more aggressive in using emergency powers to perform work on buildings that fail to correct an unsafe condition. If there's a building that's unsafe and nothing's being done and a sidewalk shed's been up for a long time, that's an unacceptable outcome. That's hurting the community, that's hurting local business, that's impacting quality of life, public safety, lighting, all sorts of things. DOB, instead of putting up a sidewalk shed and leaving it there, should actually be doing some of this work. It'll be expensive. And oftentimes when the city does work instead of a property owner, there are complications, both legal and operational. But we should be putting a lien on that building. We should be actually getting the value back that way. And instead of expecting communities to put up with having sidewalk shed up for years. And then the last one in this category here is creating a program to assist tenants that are really impacted from extended period of time for sheds to be up. This is another way of trying to incentivize property owners to just get the work done as quickly as possible so that they're not also paying for, making up for whatever negative outcome there may be, whether for a small business or for a tenant. So definitely looking to create that program through the city. Strategy 4 is actually changing the way in which we're doing an inspection and regulating. It also is a strategy for reforming design. This is an exciting one for a lot of people and one that I think folks in this committee might find interesting, particularly on the public safety side. The first idea here is to allow for drones to be used for facade inspection. This could actually make it so that before there's actually a repair that is catastrophic and actually requires significant construction, property owners could actually be inspecting their building frequently over the course of 5 years, seeing a problem emerge, fixing it before it's a real issue, and then hopefully keeping their compliance cycles quick and easy. The second one here is for design. The mayor has been very clear, and we're really pushing both legislatively and through the advocacy role that the borough president can play to change the way in which we're actually expecting sidewalk sheds to look and to be designed to keep people safe. We're talking everything from fewer crossbars in between posts. We're talking about higher design. We're talking about using netting more aggressively and cantilevers more aggressively. We're also talking about color. Right now, there are only 2 colors that can be used, and that's silly, with the exception of the urban umbrella, very fancy looking scaffolding that is monopolized by one company. We're really trying to expand that so that there are more options for a number of reasons, including lighting and aesthetics. The last thing I'll touch on, and I'm very happy for more questions, is extending local law compliance cycles. Right now, I'm sure everyone here knows, but you have a building that's required to comply with local law 11 goes through a cycle every 5 years. That is regardless of whether they've done major renovation, like a complete facade repair in the past. And it's also regardless of the type of material that is used. And quite frankly, steel and glass should not be in the same category as terracotta. Terracotta disintegrates extraordinarily quickly. It is prone to weatherization, whereas steel and glass aren't. And if someone wants to build with terracotta, fine, they should then have to comply with local law 11 fairly often. Someone who doesn't shouldn't be having to go through that cycle as often. So we're calling for the extension by 2 years. We're also trying to encourage property to do major repair once rather than every 5 years, spend a couple months doing construction, right? So if there's a way in which we can say 1 year, you're gonna have a lot of work and it's gonna be no fun, but 5 years and then 10 years after that, it's really easy. I feel like that's a fairly fair trade for a local neighborhood. And so for any building that does major facade repair, we're calling for extension again, the compliance cycle. Again, it's just a way of incentivizing one time, do the work rather than multiple times. Happy to pause there, happy to answer any questions. We have a legislative package that trying to move to the council that touches on multiple pieces of this. We've also been in touch with folks at the state level, trying to touch the pieces that are requiring state action, and trying to make some progress here.
Yeah, so that was gonna be my first thing before we get into committee discussion here is, what are the action points that would be necessary legislatively to make all of this happen?
Yeah, really appreciate that. So that there are sort of 3 levels of work being done right now. There's some of these pieces that are local controlled, that either through advocacy we can push the administration to do, or through legislation we can force the administration to do. There are pieces here that are state, and would require state action to allow the city to do. Eric touched on one of those already. That would be allowing DOB to create some sort of financing mechanism for people who demonstrate financial hardship. Would also be the petitioning for access or for mediation between property owners. That requires state action and has legislation that we're hoping is actually going to pass in this budget or this session that would allow for it. There are other things that are entirely in New York City Council already, and that we've been working with Councilmember Powers, Councilmember Botcher, Councilmember Menon, Councilmember Sanchez, Councilmember Marte, to pass a fairly robust package. Most of the things in this list have been are either introduced or being drafted right now to make progress on. The big ones already introduced have to do with drone use, have to do with design changes, have to do with repairing trees that are damaged, have to do with lighting issues, and changing the way in which contractors are required to light under scaffolding. And we expect more of these pieces here to actually be introduced fairly soon, and begin to really make some progress on the entire package here.
All right, very good. I see we have some hands up, so I'm gonna go Stu and Eric. Stu, go ahead.
Yeah, why does the LPC have to give approval when there's no architectural modification, you're just doing maintenance?
It's the question why is more because you're touching the facade of a building and you're having to take pieces off. Like often this is terracotta. When you're taking the terracotta off, the LPC requires that it actually be replaced with something that looks exactly the same. That oftentimes means you have to redesign new terracotta, you have to source that terracotta, and you have to then install it. All of which doing anything to the facade of a building requires LPC's approval.
So even though it's 1 for 1?
Yep.
I mean, is that logical?
I mean, I see where you're going. I agree with you. I think that one of the conversations we're having is trying to figure out how to relieve some of this burden on buildings broadly. It isn't an easy one, and I can't give you a reason right now why that decision was made when it was. But the result right now is that we're playing catch up a little bit and forcing folks to go through an extensive permitting timeline.
Thanks.
All right, thanks, Stu. Let's go to Anne.
So I'm curious, something you said maybe as a little bit of a throwaway about lighting requirements for under scaffolding. And I'm not sure what kinds of changes you are thinking about on that.
I can go through it a little bit. The right now there are a couple pieces. One, the lumens being used, and that the frequency of the lamps that are up. Part of design changes is going to be totally reimagining how some of this works. Obviously, if there are fewer crossbars, if there are fewer actual cross beams required in the building code, it's going to mean we're going to be changing where lights are, but we're trying to make it so that they're brighter and that they're more frequent. Go ahead.
So the reason I'm asking is completely contrary to that.
Okay.
And it is that we have actually scaffolding on our apartment is in the back of the building. And two of the buildings backing off of us are doing construction and so have scaffolding. Their scaffolding, there's no public access to it. The workers, in fact, don't even access it because it's like strutted, so it's not over our apartment. And because of the laws, like they are required to have lighting back, under the scaffolding, even though all it does is mean that I have a light shining into my bedroom window at all times. And so it seems like there should be some exception for, like, I doubt that's that unusual. There's so many buildings that, are kind of built around a space. Where, buildings on, like in this case, buildings on 47th Street, back onto buildings on 46th Street. So there's no access to that, but so does that make sense?
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah. And so that I know in the example you gave, is that a active construction or is that facade repair in local 11? I'm sorry, you're muted.
It's a little bit of both, and there's two different buildings. One of them is basically repairing all their balconies. They're like the metal around all the balconies. And the other, I think, is kind of classic pointing.
Got it. And is it just the sidewalk shed or do they have full scaffolding?
It's not actually even the sidewalk shed because it's not going over sidewalk.
Got it. Okay.
It's not, but it is scaffold. Like, I don't know how to describe it exactly, but happy to send you a picture.
I have to go back and look. I'm not sure that what we're talking about lighting is actually going to be touching the issue of lighting scaffolding itself. We're focused on the
Well, I think it's considered a sidewalk shed because I don't know what else it would be considered. So,
okay.
But in fact, it does not go over a sidewalk. And they were very responsive to the concerns of all the tenants in this building. And they have cut back on it a little bit, which I wouldn't want to get them into trouble for doing because it was just like a reasonable thing to do.
Yeah. That's interesting. That's helpful.
Yeah. So it's just, I don't know how often that comes up, but.
Yeah, maybe we can clarify the whole lighting thing as to what's being impacted.
This is a public safety committee, so I think obviously like having good lighting under these sheds is important for people both to feel and to be safe. So I don't want to take anything away from that, but there are times just when it's not necessary.
Makes sense. All right, go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, sure. Just to touch on those 2 points. The lighting, I think whatever upgrades you have in the plan are super important. I just know walking with my kids, sometimes they're walking alone. We encourage them not to walk, through sheds at night. So they have to change their paths. So figuring out ways to make that safer, I think is, really important just for pedestrians. I just feel like there's a natural uneasiness about going through those sheds at certain times at night, especially when you can't see out to the other side for some of the long ones and bigger construction projects. So just wanted to bring that up. The other thing is, and sorry to get very specific, but there is a sidewalk shed. It's just outside of our district. It's at 55 East 25th Street, and it's actually at a school building, Baruch College Campus High School. The shed has been there for 17 years. We have been talking to the building owner directly for about 5 years, and they fall in the category of, sorry, we're not going to do anything until someone forces us to. And I have the email chains and the back and forth, and basically it's cheaper for them to just keep the shed up than doing any of the facade work. And we've gotten the school construction authority involved because it's a leased space where the school is. And basically, it's just the case that you were saying. I think there's just a lot of owners who would rather not spend the money. So 17 years it's been up out front of a school. So kids have to leave that every day, sometimes when it's dark, and there's just no interest. So I'd love to get in touch with you directly about that one.
Yeah, that sounds like a fun one.
Yeah. We've got a nice
Um,
paper trail.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy to put my email here in the chat.
Yeah.
And definitely just reach out to me. I'd love to figure out what's going on. And at least like really dive into the permitting and figure out exactly what
Yeah.
that scaffolding is up for. So definitely
Thank you.
happy to help.
All right. So yeah, if you guys can connect offline, would be good.
Maybe this is tangential, but I believe it's not legal in the city to put barbed wire around the top of a sidewalk shed. Are these responsible for any kind of significant crime, people climbing up them and breaking in or anything of that sort?
I don't know, but I haven't heard, in all the conversations we've had that there's been some connection that way, but it doesn't mean it doesn't exist or that I just haven't been asking about it. Happy to if that's something that you're curious about.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of what happens is, and a couple of you guys touched on the lighting as well. I think it's all connected. I think I mean, what we see a lot in this district is homeless encampments, a lot of drug issues. I think so. I think some of the properties may be concerned about those kinds of quality of life issues taking place on their property or just outside the boundaries of their property. So I think the lighting will definitely may help with that, and B, getting these things taken down in a timely manner, and even going back on some of the ones like the one Eric was talking about, where we have just nobody pushing, so they're just not going to bother. So I mean, I think the community's quality of life is negatively impacted
Totally.
in a lot of those areas, as well as just having the structures present.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I want to add to your list though, some of these design changes where, the sidewalk shed that we're used to seeing may be less necessary. Because there might be, by changing the building code, we could actually make it so there are alternatives, alternative ways to keep pedestrians safe when there's a safety issue. So, that's netting, that's things that are higher up, that's cantilevers into the construction. There are other ways in which we could actually be protecting people on the street. And so we want to be trying to deploy those strategies whenever possible.
Yes, yeah, sounds great. Committee members, thoughts on this. Where do we want to go with this? I know there's some pending legislation that we can potentially weigh in on. There's some other measures. First, what would you suggest would be the most effective from a community board standpoint, given where everything is today?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. And I'm going to let you behind the curtain a little bit and then talk a little bit of legislation. The moment we announced this, we heard from City Hall that they were eager to work with us, particularly on some parts of it. We have also, run into the very typical and I suppose expected bureaucratic challenge that, New York City will always present when you're pushing to do new things. And so we've been really having to push them to understand that there isn't one single piece here that needs to happen. Sidewalk sheds, scaffolding, and facade repair are extraordinarily complicated issues, and you have to do a lot of these things to really make a dent. And so really been pushing at them to think very holistically and aggressively about the building code and about certainly legislative changes to the law, as well as just ways in which we want to be working together from the state legislature to City Hall to New York City Council. And so helping us really make that point would be really great. If this community board is interested in supporting this entire agenda, I think we'd be welcome to hear it in a resolution. It's something that we would then use in our push with DOB to really make sure they're paying attention to these things. And then as we continue to fill out this entire legislative package, I'm hoping that in May, we'll have most of the bills that are going to happen at the local level fully introduced to the council. At that point, then really working to support those bills either through resolution or at committee hearings would be welcome, both for us as well as the bill sponsors. The partners we have on this have been really great, but I think we're going to have to really convince some folks, particularly at the city, to do these things. And so your help would be really great.
All right, sounds good. So what do you see? I mean, what do you see as the biggest obstacles within the city that would be that would try to block this?
Yeah, I mean, you've all worked with every single agency at this point as a board. And, you know, I don't think it'll surprise you that when we're telling DOB that we want them to change, that they're reticent to do so. And so, I mean, we're finding that DOB has their own opinions and is reluctant to aggressively explore some of these options, even some of the lower hanging fruit. Some of the things that should be pretty easy to agree that we want to explore. And so definitely finding that there's some agency bureaucratic pushback to some of these things. The mayor has been very supportive. And so that's good. We have, particularly on some pieces of this, the mayor has been very clearly, you know, in the state of the city, as well as afterwards when we heard from City Hall, that there are pieces here that they're very excited about. You know, drones is on that list. I would say design changes on that list. I think that we do need a bit of a push to make sure it isn't just two things that change, right? If we're only changing design, that's not going to change whether or not they're coming down faster. If we're only looking at drones, that's going to change a very small component of all the pieces that are an issue for the regulation of local law 11 and the compliance of local law 11. So if we really want to see changes, we need to change permitting. We need to change design. We need to change lighting. We need to change the way in which property owners can communicate with each other. We need to change the way in which some of these projects are financed. We need to hold the city accountable for city property. We have to do all of these pieces. And so the real pushback here has just been that the city seems eager on one or two things, interested in one or two things, and then silent on everything else. Which again is good. We want to see that. We're glad for the partnership. We do need to make sure people understand that there is no silver bullet here. This is complicated.
All right, yeah, that all makes sense. A lot of moving parts. Anne, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, I can imagine DOB's resistance to this, both from a kind of bureaucratic, but they have a lot to do, like in all fairness.
Yep.
And I'm wondering, you know, if New York can afford it and if there are ways that we can sort of sweeten the pot for them a little bit to make them more amenable to some of these changes. I don't know if we can afford it, but it seems important.
Yeah, and there's some things that are going to be easier to afford than others. You know, technical support is something that the city does. You know, Local Law 97 is an example with an accelerator program that's, you know, it's a third party the city contracts with. It costs something, sure, but we have a $1.2 billion budget here. It's a drop in the bucket, and would, you know, I think actually make a difference to helping some of these projects get done faster. Things like that should be the types of things that we want to be encouraging. And we also have a very eager legislative branch at the local and state level that wants to do these things, and so is an active partner if the city wants to take advantage of that. I think that ultimately a lot of this stuff is budget, you're right, and DOB has a ton to do and they're vastly understaffed. We have too few people inspecting buildings. We have too few people being able to ensure that the sidewalk sheds that are up are safe and that the facade work is getting done. And absolutely that's a budget problem. We need the city to really make sure we're adequately funding DOB for any of this to have a prayer to be successful. And so your point is very well taken. And I think that, you know, sweetening the pot, it's hard to see how to do that without really just kind of saying like, well, we'll sweeten it by doing it with you and we'll help you change the law. But you know, I think that if they're willing to put some money into DOB and staff appropriately, then this is the kind of thing that people want to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, the parking garage incident from the other day. I mean, and now a lot of eyes are on DOB and potentially the lack of resources there, and they're having, you know, outstanding violations from 20 years ago. So I think there's definitely a safety element there that should hopefully you know, force some more funding towards DOB. But you know, I mean, they're so far behind, it seems, as far as just, you know, just inspecting buildings. If you want to not change the process and a lot of other things, it seems like it's going to be a massive overhaul.
Yeah, without a doubt.
So, so is now, so back to the legislation, is there anything, in the works to address the resources? Because I don't, if, let's say we were to support everything you're speaking about, you know, in order to, I mean, it's real, we need to make sure there's funding and resources devoted to DOB here. You know, what would be, I mean, the budget, what, a couple months out, what would you see as the most efficient way to see that happens, or at least starts to happen?
Sure. Appreciate the question. There's no way to legislate the way in which the mayor spends money. Legally, we're, you know, incapable of doing that. What we've been doing is really making sure that every conversation we've been having with the city about the budget includes a number of things, but this is on the list. Making sure that DOB is adequately staffed. And, you know, for a bunch of regions, and you're right, the parking garage is the latest example of things that need to be addressed at DOB. They're also without, you know, a full permanent commissioner. The commissioner currently is acting. So there's a lot going on at DOB. So we're really pushing on the advocacy side to the extent to which the committee wants to get involved in advocating for the budget on this specific issue. You know, I think we'd be open to figuring out how to do that in partnership, and I'm welcome whatever ways you all are wanting to explore. I think we find it super helpful, but it's tough to figure out a more concrete mechanism to encourage funding beyond yelling and screaming about it.
Yeah, it's almost as if you could potentially get 99% of the way there, but if there's no resources or funding to accomplish everything that we want to accomplish, it's just not going to get done.
Yeah,
I think
and
that's
again, to DOB's credit, they know this is a problem. And I think that, you know, if they had their way, you know, sidewalk shed would go up, scaffolding would go up, repair would be done, it would all calm down, and it would be very quick, very easy. It's just much harder to do than that.
absolutely. Committee members, where do you want to go with this? Do we want to hear from anybody else, any other speakers, any other information that we want to gather? How do we feel as far as supporting? Are there still other questions? Is there hesitancies on anything? Anyone? Crickets.
You know, in many cases, I like to hear from the opposition, but here I think I would just like to support the program. And if any opposition arises, at least, you know, we're moving. So I just don't understand what our resolution would say. I mean, we're just.
Yeah, I mean, I think it could go a couple of different ways. It could be supporting the plan that was outlined, or we could dig a little deeper and say, you know, support each individual. You could have a resolution or probably a bundle of resolutions that could support each individual piece of legislation and a call for budget, the appropriate budget changes. I mean, there's a few different things we could do. Anne, you want to weigh in on it?
Yeah, I think just to Chris's point about how it's kind of the whole is more than the sum of the parts. I'd rather have one big resolution that sort of gets at all of it. Because otherwise, maybe there's support for this one and not that part of it. And so, and I do think it is important to emphasize, like, this is important as a whole.
Yeah, absolutely. Good point there. I think it all kind of ties together. So, I mean, what we really want to accomplish is, have these things up only when necessary and come down as soon as possible, for all the quality of life issues that we've touched on. Does anybody want to make a motion on this, or do we want more information?
I'm sorry, a motion on, we don't have a resolution, so a motion on what?
A motion to write a resolution in support, or do we want to, bring this back in May? We have a couple of items on the agenda already for May. We could continue the conversation if there's any other pertinent speakers, or if we want to look at any legislation that's being proposed between now and then. Or option 3 would be to agree to write a draft reso that could be circulated at least 3 days prior to the May meeting, and then we could mark up the language in committee. But I would caution, if we do that, we already have at least one, maybe 2 other items on the agenda, so the meeting might probably exceed 90 minutes. If we decide to bring it back for discussion or try to mark up or whatever. Anne?
I'd be inclined to bring it back again. Listening to what Chris said, the package of legislation is not really there yet. So we might be able to say we support the plan and, the goals of it, but I don't know how concrete we can get with it at this point.
All right, so let's hold off until, so Chris, if you can get us the details, either send them to Brendan and myself, or just send them to the office, and then we'll take a look through that package. I think if we're able to support the individual pieces as a bundled package, I think that would carry a little bit further than just generic support for the plan. Because there's a lot of nuts and bolts there, and I want the board and the public to know that we've considered all the details here.
Sounds great.
All right. So I think that is it, Brendan.
Yeah, just a quick scheduling note that if this is something the committee does want to act on before its summer break, then it will need to act at the next meeting, the May meeting, because in June, the third Thursday of the month will be June 15th, which would be after full board.
Yep, that's an important point. So my intention is to not have a June meeting for that main reason. But yeah, to point anything that is passed, if we were to meet in June, it would have to go before exec in July, and wouldn't actually go before the full board until September. So, I think we should try to, keep it, work with what we have for May, and then, but if we're missing, if things are still not solidified yet, then we can work with other options. That would push it out to September. Does that sound good, Anne?
I'm just wondering from Chris, how timely is this? I mean, if you don't have the package yet, this may be a resolution we can write in the fall.
Potentially, yeah. Chris?
I honestly, it's hard to say. We want to get this done as quickly as we can. I recognize you all have a summer challenge. My only hesitancy with knowing the timing for the full package being ready is that the council is now in budget season, which slows them down considerably on a bunch of things, very understandably. And so if there's a delay there, I don't want to run into your summer break. The council also, the session ends this year. And so I think we're trying to get some movement on these bills as quickly as we can, get them introduced as quickly as we can and heard as fast as we can, knowing that everyone turns in the pumpkin December 31st. But rather not have to go through the whole thing all over again, January of next year. So.
Yeah, that's a good point too. That, there are going to be a lot of moving parts, and as we get deeper into the fall, it's going to be campaign season, elections, and I think the budget items that we'd be looking for, should come up prior to the budget being passed. I think we have some things we want to call out there, even not necessarily through the formal community board budget priorities, but certain items that would require funding. Through a resolution. All right. So thank you, everybody. We will reconvene on this in May. In the meantime, Chris, if you can get us the particulars, we can try to hash that out and figure out what we need to discuss in May, and then hopefully align on a resolution before we adjourn that night.
Yeah, Brendan, I'll get you an email with everything that we have right now tomorrow.
All right. Thanks, everybody. That'll bring us to the chair's report. I'm going to waive that. Thank you, Chris. I mean, I don't have much of a chair's report here tonight, but I will point out that we're still trying to get FDNY to present on the lithium ion battery safety issue. We have that for next month. And Brendan, what else do we have? Drawing a blank here. We had one other item on the agenda.
I would need to double check. I have to say, I don't remember
Discovery.
super well.
Oh, yes. Thanks, Stu. Yes. Yes, that's exactly what it is. It's the we want to tackle the discovery reform issue. We've invited the district attorney's office. And Stu, if you see anybody else that you think would be a relevant participant, send them my way. For those who don't know, the discovery reform issue is, I would say secondary to the bail reform. It's part of that package, but it's not often discussed. So the state budget negotiations are ongoing, as I'm sure you're reading and hearing in the news. I mean, we're not privy to all the details, but I know discovery reform is one of the items, and it came up at full board last week. So I want to have a full discussion on that with all the relevant participants. We may, the DA's action plan may change based on what's decided in the state budget, but they'll be here to give us some more insight as to what's required on their end as far as resources and what that really means for the criminal justice system. So we'll get into that, and then potentially FDNY. FDNY is not confirmed, so that may fall out depending on scheduling availability. I know that they've been getting a lot of requests, and then we'll bring back the sidewalk shed conversation. So lots to cover next month. Does anybody have any items of old or new business? Right. Seeing none, I guess we can adjourn, right? I'm good. All right, so the meeting is adjourned at 7:37. Thanks, everybody, and see you again next month.